We are going to look at the machinery that is literally keeping you alive second by second, beat by beat.
The internal plumbing.
Exactly. And we're going to start with a pop quiz.
Oh, I love a good pop quiz. Give me.
If I walked out onto the street right now, stopped 100 people, and I asked them, what organ in your body controls your blood pressure? What do you think they would say?
Oh, that's an easy one. I'd bet my house that 99, maybe even 100 out of 100 would say the heart.
The heart.
Yeah.
Every single time. It's so intuitive, right?
Of course.
You run up a flight of stairs, your heart pounds, your blood pressure goes up, you get scared, your heart races. It feels like the engine that's driving the whole system.
And it is the engine. I mean, that's not wrong. But
Yeah.
that's the misconception we really need to break down today. The engine doesn't decide how fast the car goes on a cross-country trip.
The driver does.
The driver does. And in the human body, the heart is just that engine. It does what it's told. The driver, the actual boss of your long-term blood pressure, is an organ most people would never even guess in this context.
It's the kidneys.
It is the kidneys, unquestionably.
That is the plot twist we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into Chapter 19 of a massive, really definitive physiology text.
It's the Bible for this stuff.
It really is. The chapter is titled Role of the Kidneys in Long-Term Control of Arterial Pressure and in Hypertension. And honestly, reading through this source material, it felt less like a biology textbook and more like, I don't know, an engineering manual.
That's exactly what it is. It's a hydraulic blueprint for the body.
A very complex, very elegant hydraulic machine.
And if you can understand this chapter, you suddenly understand why millions of people have hypertension, why salt is such a polarizing topic in medicine, and then why some treatments work while others are just, chasing symptoms.
So our mission today is to decode this chapter, basically line by line. We're going to try and explain every graph, every experiment, every mechanism, because we want to understand the plumbing of the human body.
It's a fascinating journey. It connects, evolution, fluid dynamics, these complex hormonal systems. But at its core, it's actually a very, very simple and elegant mechanical principle.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning, or I guess I should say the very, very beginning. The source material takes us way back in evolutionary time to explain how this system even came to be. We need to talk about the hagfish.
Hagfish. Not the most glamorous creature in the animal kingdom, I have to say.
No, it's basically a slime-producing eel-like thing that lives deep in the ocean. Kind of creepy, actually.
Right. But it's one of the most primitive vertebrates still in existence.
Yeah.
And physiologically, it gives us this incredible window into the past. The text brings up the hagfish because it has a very, very specific blood pressure situation.
It's super low, right?
Extremely. About 8 to 14 millimeters of mercury.
Okay, just for context, a healthy human is somewhere around like 100, 120 millimeters of mercury systolic. So the hagfish is operating at like 10% of our pressure.
Exactly. But the mechanism the hagfish uses to regulate that tiny pressure is the absolute foundation of our own survival. It's what the text calls the primitive mechanism.
So how does a hagfish manage its pressure without, all the complex nerves and hormones we have?
It's pure hydraulics. It's beautifully simple. The hagfish is constantly drinking seawater.
Okay.
That water gets absorbed into its blood.
Mm-hmm.
So logically, what happens to its blood volume?
It goes up.
It goes up, and in any closed system, if you add more liquid, the pressure must rise.
Okay, so drink water, volume up, pressure up. Simple enough.
Correct. Now, as that pressure gets too high for the hagfish, that pressure physically pushes blood faster through its very rudimentary kidney. The kidney just filters it and excretes the excess volume as urine.
And the pressure drops.
And the pressure drops. It's a simple input-output loop. Drink water, pressure goes up. Pee water, pressure goes down. And the text makes this crucial point right at the start. This primitive mechanism, this direct physical link between blood volume and kidney excretion, it survived. It's still the fundamental mechanism in humans.
So underneath all our complexity.
Underneath our massive brains, our complex nervous systems, hormones, emotions, all of it, we are still just hagfish trying to balance our internal fluid volume.
That is incredibly humbling. We think we're so sophisticated, but our blood pressure is being run by a system that's hundreds of millions of years old.
At its core, yes.
But in humans, we have fancier names for this. The text uses terms like pressure diuresis and pressure natriuresis. Let's unpack those.
They sound really technical, but they're very literal, which is nice. Diuresis just refers to the excretion of urine, specifically the water part. And natriuresis comes from natrium, which is the old Latin word for sodium. So it just means the excretion of salt.
So pressure diuresis is peeing out water because of pressure, And pressure natriuresis is peeing out salt because of pressure.
Exactly. And in the body, because salt and water are so chemically tied together, these two almost always go hand in hand.
And this brings us to the first major visual in our source, figure 19 to 1 ed. This is the renal function curve. I spent a lot of time just staring at this graph, and the first thing that just jumps out at you is how steep this curve is.
That steepness is the key to everything. It's the key to life, really. Let's just visualize this for everyone. On the bottom axis, the x-axis, you have arterial pressure.
Right.
On the vertical axis, the y-axis, you have urinary output. At a normal pressure of, say, 100 millimeters of mercury, you have a normal urine output. That's your baseline.
But look at what happens if the pressure goes up even a little bit. The text says at 200 millimeters of mercury, so double the pressure, the urinary output isn't just double.
No, not at all. It increases 6 to 8-fold.
6 to 8 times more. That's a massive response.
It's not a gentle slope. It's a rocket ship. And, conversely, if your pressure drops down to 50, urine output basically goes to 0. The body holds on to every drop.
So the kidney is incredibly sensitive to these pressure changes. A small rise triggers this huge flood of excretion to just dump fluid and bring that pressure right back down.
Exactly. It's a powerful, powerful buffer.
Now, a skeptic listening might say, sure, but how do we know it's the pressure itself doing that? Maybe the brain is sensing the high pressure and then sending a signal to the kidney telling it to pee.
That is a completely valid scientific question, and it's one they answered. To prove this wasn't just the brain or the nerves interfering, the source describes this classic experiment. It's in figure 19 to 2. They took dogs and they blocked all their nervous reflexes.
All of them.
All of them. They literally cut the biological internet connection between the brain, the heart, and the blood vessels.
So the brain is completely out of the loop. It can't talk to the organs.
Correct. Then they infused 400 milliliters of blood into these dogs. That is a massive volume spike in a closed system.
So following the hagfish logic, volume up, pressure should go way up.
And it did. Because the volume went up, the cardiac output doubled, and the arterial pressure spiked to 205 millimeters of mercury.
Wow. That's a hypertensive crisis, stroke level.
A dangerous, dangerous level. But remember, the nervous reflexes were blocked. The body couldn't decide to lower the pressure with its fast-acting systems. It had to rely on pure physics.
And what happened?
The urine output increased 12-fold.
12-fold.
The dogs just poured out fluid, and within 1 hour, the blood pressure was back to exactly normal.
Just by peeing it out.
Just by keying it out. This experiment proved definitively that even without a brain, without complex reflexes, the kidney volume relationship acts as this incredibly powerful stabilizer.
It's not fast, though. An hour is a long time to have pressure that high.
It's not instantaneous like a nerve reflex, no, but it is relentless, and that's the key.
And that relentlessness brings us to the next really big concept. This is an engineering term that the text uses, which I found fascinating. Infinite gain. Now, when I hear infinite gain, I think of an electric guitar amplifier feedback loop, that high-pitched squeal. But what does it mean in physiology?
It's a great term, and the analogy is actually not that far off. In control theory, gain describes how effective a system is at correcting an error. Most biological systems have what we call finite gain.
Okay, can you give me an example of finite gain?
Sure. Let's take the baroreceptors. Those are the pressure sensors in the arteries of your neck. If your blood pressure spikes to, say, 150 because you got excited, the baroreceptors will kick in and they might pull it down to 110.
Oh, they help.
They definitely help. They pull you back from the ledge. But they don't get you all the way back to the perfect 100. There's still some error of 10 points remaining. They can't fix it 100%.
Okay, so they pull you part way back, but the renal body fluid system has infinite gain.
Near infinite, yes. And what that means is that it does not stop working until the error is 0.
0.
Let's look at figure 19 to 1 again. You have the steep renal output curve, and then you have a flat line representing your daily intake of salt and water.
Where those two lines intersect. That's called the equilibrium point.
That's point A on the graph.
Exactly, point A. Now, if your pressure for some reason rises above point A, your output is now higher than your intake. You are losing fluid.
You're in a deficit.
You are in a deficit.
Yeah.
And you will continue to lose fluid until your blood volume drops enough that your pressure falls right back down to point A. It cannot stop at point A plus 1. It has to go all the way back to A.
And if the pressure is too low, say 80.
Then your intake is higher than your output. You retain fluid. Volume builds up. pressure rises, and it keeps rising until it hits point A.
It's an absolute feedback loop.
It is. As long as you have working kidneys and a steady intake of water and salt, your long-term blood pressure must eventually return to that one single equilibrium point.
This is a really powerful statement the text makes then. It implies there are only two ways, literally only two ways, to permanently change a person's blood pressure in the long run. That is the fundamental law of this entire chapter. It's the big takeaway. If you want to permanently change the long-term arterial pressure, you have to do one of two things. Okay. One, you have to physically shift the renal function curve itself. That means something is wrong with the kidney's ability to excrete salt and water. You make the kidney require a higher pressure to do its job.
And second way.
Two, you change the level of the water and salt intake line. You drastically and permanently change the input side of the equation.
That's it.
That's it.
So all the other stuff, stress, heart rate, whether your vessels are tight or loose, that's all temporary noise.
It's temporary noise unless it somehow manages to affect one of those two fundamental things.
Okay, that is a huge claim. I want to test that against some of the other concepts later, but let's stick with the curve for a minute. Let's talk about the difference between acute and chronic control. Because figure 19-4 shows two different curves. There's a chronic curve and an acute one, and they look very different.
They do. The acute curve is what we see in that dog experiment we talked about, what happens over minutes or hours. It's steep, but it definitely has a slope.
Right.
But the chronic curve, which represents what happens over days or weeks, is much, much steeper. It's almost a vertical line.
So why is it steeper? What changes over time?
The body adapts. When pressure is high for a long time, the nervous system and the hormonal systems get the message. They say, okay, high pressure is the new normal. We need to help out. So the brain reduces sympathetic activity.
Okay, the fight or flight response calms down.
Right. And it reduces the secretion of hormones like angiotensin II and aldosterone.
Those are the hormones that tell the kidney to hold on to salt. Right.
Correct. So if you reduce the hold on to salt signal, the kidney becomes even more effective at dumping salt for any given pressure. It makes the pressure natriuresis mechanism incredibly efficient.
And this is why a healthy person is what the text calls salt insensitive.
Precisely.
I've heard this term. It means I can eat a whole bag of salty chips and my blood pressure doesn't just skyrocket.
That's exactly what it means. If you have healthy kidneys and your hormonal systems can adapt properly, you can increase your salt intake by 6 times a massive amount, and your blood pressure might only go up by a few tiny negligible points.
I'm just moving up that almost vertical chronic curve.
You are. Your body just says, oh, more salt. Okay, and it just gets rid of it without needing a big pressure spike to force it out.
But not everyone is salt insensitive.
No, absolutely not. If you have kidney damage or if you have some hormonal dysfunction where you can't turn off that angiotensin or aldosterone, you become salt sensitive.
So my curve isn't vertical anymore.
It's not. It's sloped, more like the acute curve. And that means for every extra gram of salt you eat, it requires a significant measurable rise in your blood pressure to force the kidney to excrete it.
And that explains why doctors are so focused on salt restriction for certain patients, but maybe not for everyone.
Exactly. For a salt-sensitive person, salt is effectively a pressure-raising drug. For a salt-insensitive person, the kidneys just handle it. It's business as usual.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is the blood vessels. There's this formula everyone learns in basic biology. Arterial pressure equals cardiac output times Fix, total peripheral resistance, or TPR.
Yes, the classic Ohm's law for hemodynamics. P equals Q times R.
So logically, if I constrict all my blood vessels, resistance, the R, the TPR goes up.
Yep.
According to the math, pressure must go up.
It has to.
But the source material calls this a paradox. It says that increasing resistance does not change long-term pressure if your kidney function is normal. How is that possible? The math says it should.
This is one of the hardest concepts for people to grasp, but it's so critical to understanding this. You're right. Acutely, in the first few minutes, if you constrict your vessels, pressure shoots up. But then think about what happens next. The pressure is up. What does the kidney see?
The kidney sees high pressure.
So what does it do?
It starts pressure diuresis. It dumps fluid.
Right. It dumps fluid. The blood volume starts to decrease. Less volume means less venous return to the heart. Less venous return means cardiac output decreases.
Ah, so the Q in the equation goes down.
The Q goes down, and this continues relentlessly until the pressure falls right back to the equilibrium point. So you end up in this weird state where you have very high resistance, but you have low cardiac output and a normal pressure.
Wow. So the kidney literally drains the blood volume to compensate for the tight vessels.
That is a perfect way to put it. This is shown in figure 19-5.
Yeah.
It shows conditions like hypothyroidism, where resistance is really high because of metabolic changes, and yet blood pressure is normal.
Or beriberi.
Or beriberi, where resistance is super low, but blood pressure is also normal. The kidneys just adjust the volume to cancel out whatever the resistance is doing.
But there's a massive catch here, isn't there? The text says this is only true if the resistance increase happens everywhere but the kidneys.
That is the million-dollar caveat. If the resistance increase happens inside the kidneys, what we call intrarenal vascular resistance, then the entire game changes. Because if you constrict the arteries leading to the kidney's filtering units, you are basically blinding the kidney to the true systemic pressure.
Ah, so the body's pressure might be 150, but the kidney only sees 90 because its own vessels are clamped.
Exactly. So what does the kidney think is happening?
It thinks pressure is dangerously low.
And it retains fluid, it shifts its own curve to the right, and you get permanent hypertension. So increasing resistance in your legs or your arms, no long-term effect. Increasing resistance inside your kidneys, permanent high blood pressure.
That is such a critical distinction. It really reinforces that the kidney is the one calling the shots.
It's the sensor and the effector, all in one.
Now, we've been talking about salt and water almost interchangeably, but Section 5 of our outline really highlights that salt is actually much more dangerous than water. Why salt matters more than water.
Yeah, this comes down to excretion speed and some basic chemistry. Pure water is incredibly easy for the kidney to handle. If you chug a liter of water, you dilute your blood, the kidney senses that dilution in seconds, and you just pee it out. It doesn't accumulate.
But salt is different.
Salt is different. It's harder for the body to excrete, so it tends to accumulate. And when salt accumulates in your extracellular fluid, it triggers this two-step nightmare for your blood pressure.
Okay, walk us through the 2 steps.
Step 1 is osmolality. When you have too much salt, your body fluid becomes, well, saltier, technically hyperosmotic. This change is detected by the thirst center in your brain.
And you get incredibly thirsty.
Unquenchably thirsty, so you drink more water to try and dilute that salt.
Okay, so now you have the extra salt that you started with, plus all the extra water you just drank to compensate.
Correct, but that's only half the problem. Step 2. That same high osmolality stimulates the posterior pituitary gland in your brain to secrete antidiuretic hormone, or ADH.
And antidiuretic means?
Against diuresis, it tells the kidneys, do not let any water go. Reabsorb everything.
So you're drinking more because of thirst, and you're peeing less because of the hormone.
Exactly. The salt effectively traps the water in your body. This directly increases your extracellular fluid volume, which increases your blood volume, which drives up the pressure. That is why salt is the driver of what we call volume-loading hypertension.
And speaking of volume-loading hypertension, the source describes a really brutal but illuminating experiment in figure 19-7. They took dogs and surgically removed 70% of their kidney mass.
70%. So these dogs are living on just 30% of their normal kidney function. It's a model for chronic kidney disease.
And in phase 1 of the experiment, they gave them just plain water to drink. What happened?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Even with only 30% of a kidney, they could excrete the water just fine. Blood pressure stayed normal. It just shows how good the kidneys are at handling water.
Then comes phase 2. They stopped the plain water and gave them a salt solution to drink instead.
And it was chaos. Because of the reduced kidney mass, they couldn't clear that salt load fast enough. The salt accumulated, the water accumulated with it. Blood pressure shot up by 40 millimeters of mercury.
That is a massive spike. From normal to stage 2 hypertension, and then phase 3, they put them back on tap water.
Pressure normalized, came right back down. This is the perfect demonstration of volume-loading hypertension. The salt load was the direct cause.
But here's where it gets really complex. The text breaks down exactly how that volume increase turns into high pressure, and it involves a kind of switch. This is figure 19-8. I found this part fascinating because it explains how symptoms can be really misleading.
Yes, the sequential changes graph. This is so important. In the first few days after you start loading with volume, let's call it stage 1, the fluid volume is high, so the cardiac output is high. The heart is just pumping more fluid per minute. That's what drives the pressure initially.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here's the weird part. In this early stage, the total peripheral resistance, the TPR, actually decreases.
Why would it decrease?
Because the baroreceptors sense that high pressure, and they try to relax the blood vessels to compensate. They're trying to help fix the problem.
Okay, but then we move to stage 2, which is weeks later.
Yeah.
And the graph shows a complete flip.
A complete reversal. Weeks later, the cardiac output returns to near normal. But the total peripheral resistance shoots way up and stays up. The pressure is still high, but now it looks like a high-resistance hypertension.
Wait, so the volume overload just disappears. How does cardiac output go back to normal?
It doesn't disappear. It triggers a mechanism called autoregulation.
Autoregulation. Okay, let's break that down.
Think about all the tissues in your body, your muscles, your liver, your brain. They need a certain amount of blood flow to function, but they don't want too much flow.
Right.
If cardiac output is too high for a long time, the tissues are getting blasted with excess blood, excess oxygen, more nutrients than they need. It can actually wash out essential local vasodilator substances.
So the tissues basically complain, this is too much.
They do more than complain. They take matters into their own hands. The tiny arterioles within the tissues start to constrict. They tighten up to reduce the blood flow back down to their normal preferred level.
I see. So when all the tissues in the body do this at the same time?
The total peripheral resistance of the entire body skyrockets.
Okay, so the high cardiac output forces the vessels to clamp down. Once they clamp down, the heart doesn't have to work as hard, so cardiac output can go back to normal because the resistance is so high. But the pressure stays high.
Exactly. And here's the aha moment of this whole section. If a doctor looked at this patient in stage 2, weeks into the process, what would they see? They'd see high resistance and normal cardiac output. They might think, oh, the primary problem is that the vessels are too tight. We need a drug to relax the vessels.
But the root cause was actually the kidney's inability to handle fluid weeks ago.
Precisely. The high resistance is a secondary effect, a compensation, not the primary cause. The primary cause is the volume overload that started the whole cascade.
That's incredible.
The text notes that this exact pattern happens in humans on artificial kidneys in dialysis patients. If you let their fluid levels creep up between sessions, they develop this exact pattern of high-resistance hypertension.
That completely reframes how we think about high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
The symptom can be a disguise. The vessels are just reacting to the flow.
It's a perfect example of why physiology is so tricky. What you see on the surface isn't always the root of the problem.
Okay, so we've covered the mechanics of fluid and volume. Now we need to layer on the chemical control. We have to talk about the renin-angiotensin system, or RAS. This is the heavyweight champion of hormonal pressure control.
It is. If the kidney fluid balance is the slow, steady foundation, the RAS is the body's most powerful amplifier for blood pressure. It's the turbocharger.
Let's trace the pathway. It all starts in the kidney.
It starts when the kidney perceives low blood pressure. There are these special cells called juxtaglomerular cells, or JG cells, which line the small arteries inside the kidney. When they sense low pressure, they release an enzyme called renin into the bloodstream.
Okay, so renin is step 1.
Renin circulates and finds a protein called renin substrate, or angiotensinogen, which is just floating in the plasma. Renin chops a piece off of it and creates a molecule called angiotensin I.
And angiotensin is pretty mild, right?
It's very mild. It doesn't do much on its own, but then it flows through the lungs. And the lungs are lined with a ton of an enzyme called ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme.
ACE. I've heard of ACE inhibitors.
This is what they inhibit. ACE converts angiotensin I into angiotensin II.
And angiotensin II is the bad boy.
It is one of the most potent vasoconstrictors the body can make. And it does two major things. First, as you'd guess, it causes rapid, body-wide vasoconstriction. It squeezes arteries and veins. This raises pressure instantly.
Okay.
Second, and maybe more importantly for our long-term discussion, it acts directly on the kidneys.
And what does it tell the kidneys to do?
It screams at them, stop excreting salt, stop excreting water. It causes powerful renal retention of sodium and water. And as a bonus, it also stimulates the adrenal glands to release another hormone called aldosterone, which helps retain even more salt.
So it's a double whammy. It tightens the pipes to raise pressure, and it simultaneously fills the pipes by stopping the drain.
A perfect summary.
Yeah.
And the text really emphasizes the speed and efficacy of this. Figure 1910 shows a hemorrhage experiment. If a dog loses a lot of blood and you've blocked its RAS, the pressure just crashes and stays low. It's often fatal.
But if the RAS is working,
the pressure bounces back to near normal within 20 minutes. It's an incredible life-saving system.
But the RAS isn't just for emergencies, right? It's not just for hemorrhage. It acts as a stabilizer for our daily life. I love figure 1912. It explains how we can survive eating a salty pizza one day and then a bland salad the next without our blood pressure going crazy.
Yes, this is the salt intake buffer function. Imagine for a second if your renin levels were fixed, just constant. If you ate a lot of salt, your pressure would have to skyrocket to force it out. If you ate no salt, your pressure would crash.
But renin isn't fixed.
No, it's exquisitely regulated. When you eat a high-salt meal, your pressure tries to rise a tiny bit. The kidney senses this and immediately stops releasing renin. Angiotensin levels plummet. Without angiotensin telling the kidney to hold on to salt, the kidney dumps it rapidly.
And if I go on a low-salt diet for a few days?
Your pressure tries to fall. The kidney senses this, and renin levels spike. Angiotensin II spikes. The kidney holds on to every single grain of salt you have in your body. This system allows your pressure to stay perfectly stable at 100 mm Hg, even if your salt intake varies by 100-fold from one day to the next.
It's basically a chemical shock absorber for our diet.
That's exactly what it is, a chemical shock absorber.
However, like any powerful system, it can go seriously wrong. And when the RAS goes wrong, we get some very specific, very interesting types of hypertension. Let's talk about the Goldblatt experiments.
Harry Goldblatt, a famous pathologist from the 1930s, he wanted to understand kidney-based hypertension, so he created these animal models. The first is the one-kidney Goldblatt model.
This involves what? Removing one kidney and then constricting the artery of the remaining one.
Correct. So you have one single kidney left, and you put a small clamp on its main blood supply, narrowing the artery.
What happened?
The kidney, downstream of that clamp, senses very low pressure. It panics. It thinks the whole body is dying of low pressure, of hemorrhage. So it releases a massive surge of renin.
Angiotensin II spikes, and systemic blood pressure shoots up.
Right. But here's the really interesting twist you see in the graph, figure 19-14. After a few days, the renin levels actually go back down to normal, but the pressure stays high. Why?
I don't know why.
Because as the systemic pressure rises to, say, 160, it eventually gets high enough to force a normal amount of blood through that clamp. The kidney finally gets enough flow, so it stops screaming. It stops releasing renin.
So it's happy again.
It's happy again. But TA, the systemic pressure must remain high to keep that flow going. If the pressure ever dropped back to 100, the kidney would become ischemic again and start releasing renin again. So the system settles at a new high-pressure equilibrium.
So the high pressure is actually a success from the kidney's point of view. It achieved the blood flow it needed.
Exactly. It sacrificed the health of the entire rest of the body to save itself.
That's wild. Then there is the two-kidney Goldblatt hypertension. This one seems even more devious. You constrict the artery to one kidney, but you leave the other one completely normal and untouched.
This is a fascinating interaction. The constricted kidney is unhappy. It thinks pressure is low, so it does its job. It releases renin.
Okay, just like before.
That renin creates angiotensin II. That angiotensin II circulates in the bloodstream and it reaches the normal, healthy kidney.
And the normal kidney sees the angiotensin II.
Yes. And angiotensin II's message is universal. It tells the normal kidney, retain salt and water. So even though the normal kidney is receiving super high blood pressure, which should make it excrete tons of fluid,
The hormonal signal overrides the pressure signal.
it overrides it. The normal kidney, against its better judgment, becomes a salt retainer.
So the sick kidney basically corrupts the healthy kidney.
It recruits it into the conspiracy. Both kidneys end up retaining salt, volume increases, and the hypertension becomes severe and global.
And the text mentions that patchy ischemic kidney disease is basically the human equivalent of this.
Yes, this is very common in older people. Atherosclerosis doesn't block the whole renal artery evenly. It creates little patches of ischemia inside the kidney. Those small patches of starving tissue release renin, which then affects all the rest of the healthy kidney tissue around them. It's the most common cause of secondary or curable hypertension in older adults.
It's amazing how these simple mechanical blockages can drive the entire chemical system haywire. There's another example of this in mechanics driving physiology, coarctation of the aorta.
Right, this is a congenital defect, a birth defect where the aorta, the main artery from the heart, is pinched or has a blockage.
And the location is key, right?
The location is everything. The blockage is usually after the arteries that go to the head and the arms, but before the arteries that go to the kidneys and the legs.
So the upper body gets really high pressure from the heart, pumping against that blockage. But the kidneys, which are downstream, they get what? Normal pressure.
Exactly. They see either normal or even low pressure. And because the kidneys receive normal pressure, They think everything is fine in the body. They don't excrete any extra fluid. They maintain a normal blood volume.
But the upper body is screaming under high pressure.
The upper body has incredibly high pressure. The blood vessels in the arms and brain constrict via autoregulation to protect themselves from the high flow. But the kidneys set the long-term volume based on the pressure they see. Since they don't see the high pressure, they don't fix it.
It's like the captain of the ship is locked in the engine room and thinks everything is fine while the deck is on fire.
That's a perfect analogy. And it proves, yet again, that it's the kidney, and only the kidney, that sets the long-term pressure level for the entire system.
Okay, let's move to a very serious condition mentioned in the text. Preeclampsia, also known as toxemia of pregnancy.
This affects about 5 to 10% of expectant mothers. It's very dangerous for both mother and baby. The mechanism seems to start with the placenta. For reasons we don't fully understand, sometimes the placenta becomes ischemic, it gets starved of blood. When that happens, it releases toxic factors into the mother's bloodstream.
And these toxic factors damage the endothelial cells, the thin lining of all the blood vessels all over the mother's body.
Right. And specifically in the kidneys, this damage causes the glomerular membranes, the actual filtering units, to thicken. It makes it physically harder for the kidney to filter fluid out of the blood.
So if you want to push the same amount of fluid through a thicker, gunked-up filter, you need more pressure.
You need more pressure. The renal function curve shifts to a higher pressure level. Hypertension is the result. It's a sort of necessary evil, an adaptation to keep filtering the blood, but it puts the mother and baby at tremendous risk.
And finally, before we get to the big one, let's just briefly touch on neurogenic hypertension. Can stress, just by itself, cause permanent high blood pressure?
Acute stress, absolutely. If you get scared or anxious, your sympathetic nervous system clamps down, your heart races, and pressure spikes. But the evidence for chronic neurogenic hypertension is much weaker. The text points out that even if you experimentally cut the baroreceptor nerves in an animal, the pressure becomes incredibly unstable. It oscillates wildly, but the mean pressure over 24 hours doesn't stay permanently high.
The kidney eventually compensates.
The kidney eventually wins. Unless the brain's vasomotor control center itself is damaged, the kidney fluid mechanism will eventually bring the average pressure back to the equilibrium point.
Okay, we have cleared the deck. We've talked about hagfish, clamps, tumors, pregnancy. But now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The type of hypertension that affects 90 to 95% of all patients. Essential hypertension.
Also called primary hypertension, and that name essential sounds important, but historically it just meant of unknown origin.
The text seems to suggest, though, that the origin isn't as unknown as we once thought. It points a very, very firm finger at one major factor: obesity.
It does. The link is undeniable. Excess weight is a major, if not the major, driver of essential hypertension for a huge portion of the population. The text outlines 4 specific mechanisms for how obesity breaks the pressure control system.
Okay, let's run through them. Mechanism 1, increased cardiac output.
Simple mechanics. Fat is living tissue. It has miles and miles of capillaries. To supply all that extra tissue with blood and to support the higher metabolic rate from carrying all that weight, the heart simply has to pump more blood every minute. Increased cardiac output.
Mechanism 2, increased sympathetic activity.
This one is fascinating. Fat cells aren't just inert storage depots, they're endocrine organs. They release hormones, most famously one called leptin. High leptin levels are known to stimulate the hypothalamus in the brain, which in turn cranks up the sympathetic nervous system output across the whole body.
A constant state of low-level fight or flight.
You could think of it that way, yes. And that drives up pressure.
Mechanism 3, the hormones again, RAS.
Right. The increased sympathetic activity directly stimulates the kidneys to release more renin. So you end up with chronically elevated levels of angiotensin II and aldosterone. And we already know what that does. It causes salt retention and vasoconstriction.
And mechanism 4, which is purely physical.
Purely mechanical, visceral fat, the fat that's packed in around your organs, can physically squeeze the kidneys. It increases the pressure inside the renal capsule.
It's like wearing a belt that's too tight, but on the inside, around your kidneys.
That's a great way to put it. And if the kidney is being physically compressed, it can't filter as easily. It requires a higher arterial pressure to push the fluid through that compression.
So obesity is just a perfect storm. It hits you with high flow, high nerve activity, high salt-retaining hormones, and physical squeezing.
It's a 4-pronged attack on the pressure regulation system. And if you look at the final graph on this, figure 1915, the result is predictable. The renal function curve for a person with essential hypertension is shifted far to the right.
So they need a much higher pressure just to stay in balance.
Exactly. They might require a pressure of 150 millimeters of mercury just to excrete the same amount of salt and water that a healthy person excretes easily at 100.
And the treatment follows from this.
It does. I mean, obviously, weight loss works wonders because it starts to reverse all four of those mechanisms. But pharmacologically, we use vasodilators to try and improve blood flow to the kidney, and we use diuretics or natriuretics to help the overloaded kidney dump the salt and water. We're essentially trying to manually replicate what the healthy kidney does naturally.
We are nearing the end of our deep dive. We need to put all of these pieces together. Section 11 is the integrated multifaceted system, and figure 1916 is this beautiful summary graph that shows the timeline of all the pressure control mechanisms working together.
This is the grand finale of pressure physiology. It shows how the body responds to a pressure disturbance over time. So let's imagine a sudden change. Say you stand up too fast or you have a minor hemorrhage and lose some blood.
Okay, so pressure drops. Who reacts first?
Seconds. Within 3 to 5 seconds, the baroreceptors, the chemoreceptors, and the CNS ischemic response. These are pure nerve reflexes. They react instantly to clamp down vessels and speed up the heart to keep you from fainting.
They're the first responders.
First responders, exactly. They're there for immediate survival. But they don't last. They fatigue or adapt within hours or days.
So who takes over next?
Then, over the course of minutes to hours, the intermediate systems kick in. Things like the stress relaxation of blood vessels, where they slowly stretch to accommodate changes in volume, the capillary fluid shift, where fluid moves from your tissues into your blood to prop up the volume, and the acute vasoconstrictor phase of the renin-angiotensin system.
And then finally,
Hours to days and onward to infinity. The renal body fluid system takes over.
the slow giant wakes up.
The slow, relentless giant. And the graph shows something absolutely crucial here. If you look at the feedback gain of these systems, the gain of the nerves is pretty low. They only correct about half the problem. The gain of the intermediate systems is moderate. But the feedback gain of the renal body fluid system,
It's the only line on the graph that reaches the infinite gain level.
it is the only system that will not stop until the pressure is exactly back at the equilibrium point. The nerves buy you time. The hormonal systems buy you time. But at the end of the day, the kidney must balance the intake and the output. It is the final arbiter. If the kidney's equilibrium point says the pressure is 150, then the pressure will be 150. No amount of baroreceptor firing will change that in the long run.
It's amazing to think that these incredibly complex systems like renin and aldosterone, which we spend so much time on, are really just helpers. Their main job is to make the kidney more efficient.
That's what the text says. They steepen the chronic curve. They make the kidney better and faster at its fundamental job. But the core mechanism is still that primitive, simple hagfish loop. Volume in must equal volume out.
So let's wrap this all up. We started by debunking this really common idea that the heart controls blood pressure. We've learned that no, the kidney is the long-term boss. We've talked about infinite gain, the unique dangers of salt, and the mechanical reality behind most forms of hypertension.
We have. And for me, the really big takeaway is the sheer elegance of it. We are these incredibly complex beings, but our moment-to-moment survival hinges on a simple hydraulic balance that's managed by this ancient organ.
Here's a final thought for you to carry with you then. We are all, in a sense, carrying an ancient ocean around inside of us. That's our extracellular fluid. It has roughly the same salinity as the primordial sea where life began. And our kidneys are the guardians of that internal ocean. Their job is to make sure it doesn't dry up and to make sure it doesn't flood the system. And they are doing this using a fundamental mechanism that has barely changed since our distant ancestors were swimming in the deep sea.
That's a beautiful perspective. It really it puts that salty bag of chips into a different context, doesn't it?
So next time you sit down to a meal, maybe just take a second to appreciate your kidneys. And perhaps, just perhaps, think twice before you add that extra shake of salt. Your inner hagfish will thank you.
It definitely will.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.